Please join me in welcoming to the stage SWANA's Vice President, Michelle Leonard, who will introduce our next speaker. Michelle?
Good morning, everybody. Please take your seats. We've got another wonderful speaker, and we're going to launch right into it. I'm pleased to introduce Sarah Sladek, who is the CEO of XYZ, which is a future-focused management consulting team that specializes in helping organizations engage generations X, Y, and Z. Sarah is a generational expert. She speaks and consults on topics such as demographic shifts, talent management, multi-generational workforce, leadership development, and success planning. Please help me welcome Sarah, who's going to describe how we can reduce employee turnover, increase employee engagement, and build our pool of emerging leaders. Sarah?
Good morning and welcome to the end of work as we know it. How many of you recognize most of the images in that video? How many of you have lived through most of those experiences? Okay. Well, we're kind of lamenting the fact that we're at the end of an era. And we are indeed at the end of an era. We are seeing the culmination of a perfect storm. And we can really track a storm down to three key reasons. Number one, we're seeing a declining economy. And we really talk a lot about the recent recession, but actually, ever since the dot-com bubble burst, our economy really hasn't recovered. And this is creating tremendous challenge with trying to recruit and retain talent. And I'll explain why in just a little bit. The second major shift we're seeing is rapidly changing technology. Do you know there's been more technology developed in the last 5 years than in the last 50? That is substantial, radical, unprecedented change, and it certainly changes the workplace. And the third major shift, which I'm going to focus on today, is the demographic shift. We are on the brink of the largest shift in human capital in history. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, as soon as next year, 2015, baby boomers will no longer be the majority of the workforce. And to put that into perspective, baby boomers have been the majority of the workforce for several decades. And every industry, with the exception of technology, is largely managed, supervised, and led by baby boomers. But that's about to change. So by next year, Bureau of Labor Statistics says that it won't be baby boomers anymore. The majority of the workforce will actually be Generation Y. Generation Y, also known as millennials, is currently between the ages of 19 and 32, which means when they become the majority of our workforce will be in their 20s. Are you ready for that? It's a little bit scary, isn't it? And here's a chart showing the composition of the U.S. workforce and how it will change. Generation X is sandwiched in the middle. They are in the workforce in full, and they will stay at 22%. Let's talk about your industry and what this means. According to the Department of Labor, waste management jobs have the potential to grow 10% every year for the next several years. That is phenomenal. Amazing growth. Most industries aren't facing those types of productions, so that's really, really good. But on the flip side, we have some challenges. And it really starts with this fact. There are few young people interested in waste management as a career opportunity. And that leads to all kinds of things like negative perceptions about the workforce. It leads to difficulties recruiting and retaining employees. And of course, business continuity becomes a key concern. In other words, what's going to happen to your businesses 5 years from now, 10 years from now? What's going to happen? Well, before we can go forward, we kind of have to go back, because we're at a crossroads. Clearly, we're not coming into this on the same path that got us here. We have to decide, either we stay on the same path we've always been on and we hope and pray it's all going to work out, or we recognize that we have to choose a different path because everything about the world we know is changing. But let's go back to fully understand what got us here and what we're going to do to navigate the future. And it starts with the baby boomer generation. The baby boomer generation, again, has been the majority of the workforce for quite some time. They were raised during a very wealthy, prosperous time in the United States. And there were ample job opportunities, more people going to college. It was a post-war era, lots and lots of children being born. Before I move on, I want to just point out, notice how everyone in this picture kind of looks the same. Everyone has similar outfits. Everyone's wearing dark shoes. They have similar haircuts. And I'll get back to that in just a moment. But the baby boomers were raised to follow kind of a certain career path or life path. And it's very similar to the generation that came before them and the generation that came before them, in that you would go to school, you would get a job, you would get married, you would have children. Most American households could only afford one television at this point in time, and everyone watched fairly family-friendly programming together. And you would get a job, and you would work in that job, sometimes for the same company, until you retired. Now, only recently have we kind of seen this career and life path change course. But when we look at generational differences, we look at what influences you during your most influential years, and that's childhood and adolescence. And that's kind of what you go back to base on all the time. Those are your values. But then boom, in 1965, a radical change started to occur. I'm curious to know in this audience, if you were born between 1965 and 1981, would you stand up, please? 1965 to 1981, or raise your hand if you're in the back. Okay, very good. So this is Generation X. Take a look around. Hi. Okay. So Generation X is called X because they were born at the crossroads of cultural and social change. What kind of change? Well, one of the best visuals I can show you is of the Beatles, who came on the scene at the tail end of the baby boomer generation. We're celebrating 50 years since they arrived in America in 1964. Notice once again how everyone kind of looks the same. But then just 3 years later, 1967, into the Gen X era, the Beatles look like this. So what happened? Besides drugs. We started to see some change. And this is really, really important. Anyone born 1964 or earlier was really raised to value conformity. Do what society expects of you, follow certain social rules, serve your country, be loyal to your employer. But anyone born 1965 and later was really raised to value individuality. Do what you want. And some people blame this man for that. Because all of a sudden we had a childhood educator telling children, you are unique. You are special. Do what makes you happy. As long as you're doing what makes you happy, maybe that means divorce, and almost overnight the divorce rate of Xer parents skyrocketed. 40%, it's continued to climb. So we had the first generation of latchkey children, because this was before after-school programs and childcare. And if you work with a Gen Xer, you will note that they are very, very self-sufficient, very independent, because they've been raised to be that way. In the late 70s, we started to see 30, we're going on 40 years of massive layoffs and downsizing and mergers. Generation X is the first generation never to have known job security. They're constantly worried about losing their jobs. In 1980, cable television arrived. That might not seem like a very big deal, but all of a sudden you have access to news 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And let's face it, sometimes that news is good news, but most of the time it's bad news. So now we have a generation being raised on all this negativity. They're seeing the nation's leaders lie, fail to deliver on their promises. And we saw the dawn of customization and the dawn of globalization. Instead of Woodstock, this generation was having Live Aid. But by and large, amidst all this change and trying to figure out how to navigate it, we started to see a lot of rebellion. And we're not going to take it anymore. And just when you think you kind of have these generations figured out, well then boom, another wave of change occurs in 1982. So here's the real test. If you were born between 1982 and 1995, would you stand up, please? 1982 to 1995. Oh, we have a few. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 people. Woo! Let's give them a round of applause. Okay. So remember what I was just saying, that as soon as next year, the Bureau of Labor Statistics predicts that Generation Y, also known as millennials, will be the majority of the workforce. We have 9 of them in this room, so we have some work to do, right? But Generation Y has some of the same influences as Xers. They too have seen the nation's leaders lie, fail to deliver on their promises. They've actually seen the fall of entire corporations due to unethical practices. But they've had some really different influences as well. They've had a lot of violence close to home, from school shootings to September 11. So we saw the pendulum shift from really hands-off parenting with Xers, who basically raised themselves, to extreme hands-on or helicopter parenting with Generation Y. Generation Y, in fact, is the most protected, supervised, provided for generation in history. And if you are a baby boomer, you might have a Gen Y living in your basement right now. So Generation Y has this great rapport with their parents, great relationships. They kind of move into the workplace and they expect to have that same great rapport. The concept of hierarchy and paying your dues and working your way up the ladder is a little bit foreign to them. They've been dubbed the trophy generation because they've always been rewarded for participation and not achievement. So just for showing up, just for going out for the team, everybody gets a trophy. Just for showing up for work, they're kind of thinking, okay, here I am, what do I get? They have a very, very high need for that return on investment. And we all know this generation has been raised with technology, first generation ever to have never known life without it. But do you really comprehend what that means? On basic needs assessments, Generation Y will always put access to technology on the same level as access to oxygen and freedom. So they literally feel like they can't live without it. For those of us born before this era, that seems absolutely ludicrous, but that puts into perspective just how important that technology is to them. And they've had a rocky transition from college to career, very high unemployment, but again, like I said, that's about to change. Now, just for kicks, it's kind of hard to say who's coming next. It's Generation Z. We're going to start hearing a lot more about Generation Z because this year, the oldest Zs turn 18. And we can really only imagine that they're like Gen Y on steroids. But here's the good news. They're being raised in a world that's very focused on environmentalism. Here's a little snapshot.
When I recycle paper, I save trees.
With recycling, old things turn into new things.
If you just recycle it, you can keep using it over and over.
We can take things and reproduce them to make the same things over again.
You have to help the earth.
Because if we waste it all, then we'll run out of those resources.
If we don't recycle, we'll be a garbage world.
Okay. But we're kind of also, with Generation Z, moving towards the Jetsons era. I see that you have a session here on drones, which is interesting. And we're seeing robots being developed in other countries, and soon we'll see it here in the United States. And if Sir Richard Branson gets his way, pretty soon we'll have space travel, which would be pretty crazy. We'll go into Mars and all kinds of things. But I want to show you a writing sample of a Gen Z. This is real. This is the son of a friend of mine. He's in preschool. And this preschool-aged boy, his class was asked to write 3 sentences about himself. Here's what this boy wrote. I can poop, I can pee, I have an iPhone. So this is our future. So if we go back and we come up to present day, it really boils down to one thing, right? Change. It's actually a really fascinating time to be alive, because there's been more change in the past few years than at any other time in history. Really rapid, unprecedented change. We're all in this boat together. We're trying to figure out how to navigate it. But when you encompass all this change, you really have to look at, okay, what all has been redefined as a result of different generations coming into view. And number one, we've seen our values be redefined. As I mentioned, we've moved from conformity to individuality. We've also seen our organizational cultures be redefined. You know, we've moved from really formalized, buttoned-up structures to very casual approaches to work. And whether you realize it or not, we're not only on the brink of a generational shift, but also a gender shift. For the first time in history, more women are pursuing undergraduate and graduate degrees. But we've also seen the approach to work be redefined. You know, again, we've gone from punching a clock and very scheduled and structured work environments to very free-flowing, flexible, even playful approaches to work. So when you look at all this change, you have to ask yourselves, what about my company? What about my job? What about our industry? Don't we also have to get really comfortable with this idea of change and actually make change happen? And that's easier said than done. And because of all this change, you know, one thing we really kind of minimize is that we've actually moved from an industrial era to a post-industrial or knowledge-based and information-based era. And we now have a generation, Generation Y, who's come of age only in the post-industrial era. So they're not going to go back to basics on anything because this is the only world they've known. And because of these dramatic shifts, we see generation gaps emerge. Because we have different values, we have different needs, wants, interests, and expectations. And sometimes those gaps can be quite significant. Here's a brief video to give you an example.
So, Marathon Industries, give me a breakdown.
It's a B2B company that provides cloud storage for Fortune 500 companies.
Chet, what did the market research turn up?
What? Oh, I Googled them, but the results were weird.
You didn't use the market research database that we spend thousands of dollars a month on, and that you were specifically trained to use.
I quit. This job is different than I thought it would be.
Stop. Does this situation look familiar? A new type of worker has entered the workforce. They're called millennials, and they're terrible.
Okay. And with 43% of the workforce now reporting to a younger boss, that's also fueled generation gaps. If anyone saw the movie In Good Company, here's a little clip of it.
You're my new boss.
I guess so.
How old are you?
I'm 26 years old. How old are you?
I'm 51.
Wow. It's like a year older than my dad, so that's weird.
Yeah.
Definitely weird, right? But we got to figure out how to bridge generation gaps. We got to figure out how to engage. We got to figure out to make sure everyone feels that they belong, because you really have no other option. We really have no other succession plan. This is it. This is it. If you feel like this is extremely challenging, I assure you, you are not alone. You can't open a Business Week or Forbes or Fortune without seeing some sort of list, a list of the best companies to work for, best place to launch a career, best place to intern. And you know why that is? That's because even corporate America is saying, oh my gosh, on average, we're able to retain people under the age of 35 for about 20 months. And that's not long enough. We're losing billions of dollars in employee turnover. And we have to learn how to engage these people, so they're taking really drastic measures to try to become a next generation employer of choice. And that's why you see all these lists. But we're all in this boat together. We're trying to figure out, how do you engage this elusive young talent? I think we have to ask, just as the people on those lists, the companies on those lists are asking, it's not necessarily about our current workforce. It's really being very future focused and thinking about the future workforce, thinking about that succession plan and actually putting perhaps even more value in that. Because if we don't have a talent pipeline, we have nothing, just as the previous speaker was talking about. You've got to really understand, what does that next generation of talent, that emerging talent, what are they going to need and value? What do they need from us as a place of work? Now, I just want to point out a couple of trends that we've seen emerge, and that's really defining kind of this new workforce. And the first thing is recessionistas. We have a generation that's coming into the majority of the workforce that has been raised primarily during a recession era. And as a result, that kind of changes what they want from employment. For example, if you think just about employee benefits, when baby boomers came of age, they aspired for the American dream. And that American dream meant buying houses and wanting stocks and wanting 401ks and having these great financial nest eggs. But this younger generation is going, oh my gosh, the cost of living for everything has gone up, and we are now surpassing $1 trillion in student debt. They are broke, they are lost, and they really don't value some of those long-range financial investments whatsoever. What they do value is access to assets via technology. And so that changes some of those employee benefits and that mindset. You need to ask yourself, what do we provide our employees that is actually useful and value to them right now? If you're asking any of your young employees, where do you think you're going to be in 5 years? You'll probably get a blank stare, because they're not really thinking 5 years out. They are the instant gratification generations. They're only thinking about right here, right now. So what do you provide for them that's going to be beneficial here and now? And speaking of instant gratification, that's the other major shift we're seeing. We now have a generation coming to the table that's only known life using technology. All the rest of us are digital immigrants. They are truly the digital natives. And if you think about technology and how that influences our lives and our businesses, I mean, every 30 seconds, what happens via technology, it's absolutely mind-blowing. Or if you think about how technology has influenced, just looking at when the Pope was announced in 2005, this is what the audience looked like. But in 2013, this is what the audience looked like. Technology, it's everywhere. It's influencing us. But don't get hung up on the actual tools and some of those things. Think about what technology has actually introduced and how it has changed our lives. Because of technology, we have globalization and global thinkers. Because of technology, we have workers that expect instant gratification and consumers that expect instant gratification. Because of technology, we have moved to authentic, credible communication, really transparent, and a dialogue with workers, open book management, those types of things. If you haven't yet, I would encourage you to go out and see what are former employees talking about us, what are they saying about us online. Looking at Glassdoor and Indeed, those are two posting sites where former employees can post reviews about you. So again, because of technology, we're moving to this era of really transparency. Nothing is a secret anymore. And so we have to become really, really consumed with trust or building trust. Do you remember this ad campaign? Remember this ad campaign? It was a little bit ahead of its time in that it really positioned the PC as a baby boomer and the Mac as a Gen Y. But here's the deal. Macintosh, Apple, knew that young consumers, their target market, really distrusted easily. And so they wanted to build distrust in anything that wasn't a Mac. Check it out.
Hello, I'm a Mac.
And I'm a PC. Hey, Mac, did you hear the good news? Windows 7 is out, and it's not going to have any of the problems my last operating system had. Trust me.
I feel like I've heard this before, PC.
What? Windows Vista's here, and it's not going to have any of the problems that Windows XP had. It's not going to have any of the problems that Windows ME had. It's not going to have any of the problems that Windows 98 had. It's not going to have any of the problems Windows 95 had. It's not going to have any of the problems Windows 2 had. Trust me. This time it's going to be different. Trust me.
Do you trust him? What do you do to get your employees to trust you? Just shout it out. What do you have to do? How do you build trust? Consistency. What else? Honesty. What else? Transparency. Yes. Trust them. Do what you say you're going to do, right? So trust is really important. Because of technology, we can now customize. We can customize anything and everything. And if you haven't had an employee ask you, well, what is it that you provide for me, specific to me in my career path, or if you're starting to field these interesting questions from consumers, that's because of customization. We can customize everything. So why not our trash service or our employee experience? So it's asking yourself, okay, how does our company actually deliver on the values that have been introduced by technology, knowing that we have a generation coming to the table that's never known life without it, and they're going to just naturally expect these things. Globalization, instant gratification, authenticity and transparency and trust and customization. The other area where we're seeing some major shifts is migration. Generation Y has been referred to as the great migration of the 21st century. Perhaps you've noticed that in pretty much every major urban area throughout the United States, there's a lot of urban redevelopment going on. And that's because Generation Y, as they're moving into young adulthood, they're not moving out of these urban cores. They're actually preferring to stay in. But it's interesting to kind of look at some of the traits of a generation, a very young generation, influenced by some substantial changes. And this really boils down to two key things. Number one, they want really flat organizations. They want a lattice approach. They want to be able to move around within a company and not necessarily up and down. And they have this mentality, YOLO, you only live once. When you think about it, in their young lives, there's been a tremendous amount of negativity, from corporate downfalls to Amber Alerts to September 11 to school shootings to the worst recession in history, and so on and so forth. So naturally, they have this attitude that if I'm going to work for you, it better be a pretty positive, happy experience. I don't want any more negativity in my life. But it's interesting, if you are the most protected, supervised generation in history as children, as young adults, Generation Y is gravitating towards adventure, risk, challenge, competition. They're gravitating towards connectivity. They don't like to be in isolation, but to do things collaboratively, in teams, in groups, and being in close connectivity with one another. And they're gravitating towards convenience. And again, being an instant gratification generation, you want everything to be convenient because you only live once. So they want to live in close proximity to where they live, work, and do business. And it's asking yourselves, how do we make the work experience extremely convenient? And the consumer experience too. And the other thing they're migrating towards is really, truly making a difference. And every generation has talked about doing this, but they're really making it happen. In fact, research shows that more than 85% of consumers within this age range will link a commitment to a cause to a purchasing decision. And that's why you see companies like Coca-Cola wanting to save the polar bears. And this is great news for your industry, because this generation is really inspired to save the environment and really interested in energy, converting waste to energy. And so talking about that is really important. So migration, ask, how can our company deliver on these values? Being a lattice organization, more flat, incorporating some adventure in our connectivity and convenience, as well as making a difference. I would even take that making a difference a step further. You know, all too often when we're talking to potential employees, we're talking about, you want to come work here because we have a great compensation package and we have this and we have that and blah, blah, blah. What if, you know, those are features. What if we talked about outcomes? If I held up a tissue and I said to you, this tissue is square and white and you use it to blow your nose, and you'd say, yeah, Sarah, that's really obvious. But if I instead said to you, by using this brand of tissue, you will help prevent the spread of germs by 99%. Then you would likely say, oh my gosh, I see real value in that particular brand and purchase. Well, why don't you talk about that? Why don't you talk about how your companies make a positive outcome for your employees or for your community? What if you could actually answer this question? How working for our company actually makes a difference in people's lives. That's the story that your employees and prospects want to hear, and your consumers as well. The other area where we're seeing a major shift is this return on investment concept, the trophy kid mentality. And what's really fascinating is that all of these trends I'm talking about actually trickle up, and that's why it's so important. You know, every trend throughout history starts with the youngest generation, and it moves up and it influences the masses. And so it's so important to look at, okay, what are these trends that are emerging, and getting a good idea for what the future holds for your companies. So trophy kids, it really boils down to three things. There's that YOLO thread again, happiness. They want to feel really positive about where they're working and who they're working with. They want the experience to be phenomenal. They want some sort of return on investment, whether that's appreciation or recognition. I've actually seen companies take rocks and write, "You rock" on them and give them to employees as a traveling trophy, or Employee of the Month parking, or just little perks that go a long way, and simply saying thank you and we appreciate your time and talent. And of course, that service component, that opportunity to not only advance their own careers, but to give back and do something positive and make a difference for others. I'd like to show you a brief clip of Network Waste, which is a waste removal company based in the UK. But these are some employees talking about their employment experience.
Everyone's friendly.
The people are brilliant. The bosses are brilliant.
Customers
The
are
customers
brilliant.
The customers make us smile. It's actually a pleasure, not a chore, coming to work.
That's true.
It is true,
Definitely.
very true.
Everyone's really, really friendly, and like, I've fitted in really well already.
You meant to say the training's brilliant.
It
Brilliant.
It's just a really kind of friendly environment.
We work as a big team. We're like a big working, functioning family. There are certain perks to the job. Mondays we have free bacon and sausage rolls.
Obviously it's performance-related pay, so the better you work and the better money you're going to take home.
Benefit-wise, obviously we've done a bonus here, so I've got a bonus. So I've earned it and I've got a big bonus to spend it.
I suppose the opportunities, the training, the opportunities they've given me.
People have helped me wherever, in any aspect of the job.
I've actually got a career now.
Okay, so very brief clip, but what were the ages of these employees? They skew younger, right? What were some of the words? I know that they have a thick accent, but if you could pick up on some of the words and things they were talking about, what were some of the common themes? Friendly. I, yes, it's all about me. Yes, what else? Okay. Collaboration, family. I have opportunities. I have a career. Opportunity to be trained, opportunity to advance. We have some great perks, free food. People smile a lot. They love being in the company of the people that they are working with, which is great. It speaks volumes about that company. Do you feel like you want to work there? Don't they look like fun? Yeah. So think about how you can market your company. You know, really, truly, if you had 30 days to do something, you know, at least one thing that you think would really, really improve your employee experience, what would that one thing be? What would that one thing be? And why aren't you doing that right now? We don't have the luxury of time to kind of wait and see, because like I said, this is our only succession plan. We got to get to work and creating a phenomenal work experience right now. I think the next generation of choice, the employers of choice, are going to be many, many, many things, as I've talked about here. They're going to really tap into those concepts of migration and trophy kids and YOLO and customization and technology and all of those things. They're going to put the needs and values of the emerging employees first. And more than anything, a next generation employer of choice is going to be visionary. They're not going to be comfortable with here and now. They're not going to be comfortable with what is and what has been. They're always going to be asking themselves, what can we be? What could we do better? Where are we going? Who is going to be next? Not only what, but who. And that's a huge question mark and a huge challenge for many, many companies. And I want to take action to make sure that's not your company, because time is running out. Soon as next year, Generation Y will be the majority of the workforce. So make an effort to be a next generation employer of choice. Do it now before it's too late. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Sarah Sladek. I thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much. That was fabulous. You know, I just want to tell you that I'm sure there are more Gen Xers in our group out here. They're just still sleeping after last night's party.
That's possible.
There's two words I took away from both Ken and Sarah's presentations today, and one was alignment. We've got to know what we're trying to do and how we're going to get there, and we need to teach others what that is, and change, and we need to start thinking differently. So I really appreciate your helping us to start to think differently and joining us here today. We do have a few minutes for questions. We don't have any mics out in the audience, but I know this group, we're loud, and I would love to get some input, some questions from anyone who would like to ask Sarah something about your company or our industry as we move forward. Yes.
How do you feel texting is doing as far as promoting communication?
So the question was, how does Sarah feel that texting is impacting communications?
Do you feel your employees are texting too much, or do you not allow them to text, or what's the situation? Your children. Mm-hmm. Right. A friend of mine works for Coca-Cola, and he was lamenting the fact that he just had an employee alert him via text that she was going to be taking 2 weeks off to get married. And he was saying, why on earth wouldn't she come and talk to me? You know, I think the important thing is to have those conversations with employees or kids or whoever it may be about when the situation is perhaps appropriate to have a face-to-face dialogue as opposed to sending a text, which in some people's opinions can be too casual of approach or informal approach to communication. But keeping in mind that for this generation, you know, we critique them a lot for not having those informal communication skills and that they're always like this. They, in contrast, on surveys and in research, would argue that, you know, I'm extremely connected because I'm constantly in touch with people and many, many people, and I have many, many friends via social media and all of that. So it's a perception shift. But I think if you have employees that are crossing that boundary and alerting you to vacation via text, that's a conversation to have with them about certain times when it's okay to text you about certain things, but certain things where you really feel they should be talking to you face to face. It's just having that dialogue, that compromise. It's a good question.
Anyone else have a question? You know, I know for me, similar to what Kevin asked, is it seems that the younger generation relies a lot on the web and the computer for getting information. And myself, being a little bit older, personally, I think there's no substitution for picking up the phone and calling someone. And last week I did that, and I was trying to get some information from a source for a project I was working on, and I picked up the phone and I called him. Guy never got the phone message. He said, why didn't you email me? Yeah. But, you know, am I just too old and too old school? You know, do we just get rid of the phone on the desk? Or, you know, is there a little bit of both still?
Right. Communication has been a challenge for forever, really. You know, we do research not only future, but on history too. And it's interesting to go back and look at some documents from the 1950s and see that there was a lot of controversy about giving employees phones on their desk, because people would just talk on the phone all day. We can't give them that freedom. And it's the same situation today with texting and email. And we have so many options via communication. I definitely think the phone is still valuable. I also think that maybe sometimes it's helpful to try 2 methods of communication, that you leave a voicemail, but then you send an email and say, just to let you know, I left you a voicemail. I have this question or I have this concern. We're just getting to that point of multimedia touch points, and people have different preferences, and we have to be willing to adapt and be flexible.
Yep. Anyone else? Well, I know that Sarah will be around for a little bit if you do have any more questions. I would like to extend our thanks to you and provide you a little bit token of our appreciation. The exhibit hall will be open shortly. Please go out and talk to the vendors and learn new things, whether they are X, Y, or Z generations. And thank you again for joining us.